Good morning, everyone. Can I acknowledge the National President, Gabriel, who does a wonderful task in herding cats, as a political party is, and there's no more political party that is of independent spirit than the LDP. Can I acknowledge all of you as members, supporters of freedom? Can I also acknowledge all of those of you who are here today who are supporters of the Centre for Independent Studies, of the Institute of Public Affairs, of the Australian Taxpayers Alliance, of the Menzies Research Centre, of the Institute for Progress, of Freedom Works. I believe we are all in this together. We will all have different strands and different philosophies slightly. We might be a bit more liberal, a bit more conservative, a bit more libertarian, but I think the task ahead of us is to undertake nothing more than the rebirth of liberalism in Australia. When David asked me to speak this morning, I was a little bit nervous because I would probably regard myself as just a bit more conservative and liberal than libertarian. My only libertarian political claim to fame is when I made the mistake of standing for pre-selection for the Liberal Party 3 times. Eventually you give up. At my last pre-selection attempt for a state seat in Victoria, I can lay claim to being asked in the pre-selection round table, John, how could you be a Liberal member for Parliament when the Institute of Public Affairs came out and opposed the coalition banning solariums? How can you be part of the Liberal Party? That's my claim to libertarianism. Can I acknowledge the great Senator David Leonhelm, Aaron, who we are so proud of in WA, my great friend Tom Switzer, who will do a fantastic job at the Centre for Independent Studies, following in from the huge commitment and huge legacy of Greg Lindsay. We are all in this together. When I was thinking about what to say about David, I was quickly Googling a comment that I remember that was in the Fairfax Press a few years ago, and it was the first comment that provoked a couple of my lefty liberal friends to say something nice about David. And I was trying to find out exactly what that quote was, and just then as Tom was speaking, I was a little bit rude. I was Googling, listening to Tom while Googling the article. I couldn't find the article, and I'll tell you what David said in a moment, but when you Google David's name, you come across these classics. David Leonhelm's childcare comments leave viewers gobsmacked. Australia's nastiest, most sexist politician is a disgrace to the office. David Leonhelm has little understanding of the facts of life. David, good on you. That is what we need. So as I said, I'll try and recall vaguely what it was that prompted my lefty friends to not look askance at David for the first time. And it was, I think, Latika Burke, a very good journalist at Fairfax, who was ringing around some politicians and asking them what they would like for Christmas. David, I hope I haven't completely misquoted you, but your comments from memory were something like, what I want for Christmas is the right of same-sex married couples to defend their marijuana crops with a shotgun. And that goes to some of the things I'd like to talk about today. I have a prepared speech, which I'll speak to and will be available on the IPA website later on. But what I might do is just pick up a couple of points that Tom made in relation to the questions about culture. I've now been at the IPA 14, 15 years. I'm firmly of the Andrew Breitbart position, which is politics, policy is downstream of culture. One of the great things that I think the LDP has done, not just David, not just to Aaron, not just Sam Cannard standing as a candidate, which has been fantastic, not just all of you participating, is to change the cultural debate. And I'm the very first to argue that the IPA, over its 75-year history, we're celebrating our 75th anniversary this year, has at times focused too much on the economics. But it is culture, it is public debate, it is a discussion about the morality of government, the morality of the state. It is a discussion about human flourishing and about why we are here. And as you know, the IPA, the CIS, all of us have done a lot of work and good work on tax, on federalism. We have to continue arguing to cut red tape. But if we don't understand that it has a moral purpose at the end of it, it is all for naught. Nothing upsets me more than when I hear good politicians, and there are one or two, Labor, Liberal, they're most likely to be LDP politicians. But when good politicians, especially from Labor and Liberal, say, look, you know, these reforms we are not undertaking on any ideological purpose. Everything is ideological. When good politicians undertaking welfare reform saying, we are undertaking these reforms on the basis of evidence, on the basis of a non-ideological position, I think that is absolutely failing. We want every person to experience the dignity and human flourishing, for example, of earned success, of a job, of paid employment. And when we engage in a debate about simply non-ideological, evidence-based policy, we are failing in the future of politics. One of the things that pleases me most when I go to Canberra, and nothing pleases me when I go to Canberra these days, is you're walking around Canberra, Parliament House, and you're chatting, most of the time I chat to coalition MPs, and you're talking to them about what's happened in the chamber, what's happened in the Senate, and invariably some of the more thoughtful coalition MPs will say, David's comment was really good the other day. What David said in the Senate, in the chamber, you know, had a big impact, and people listened. Oh, good, you know, good. David's a member of the IPA. I'm honoured and delighted that Senator Leon Helm's a member of the IPA. I tell these coalition MPs, and then they say, and this has happened 3, 4, 5, 6 times. They say, I wish I could have said that. And then you say, why don't you say that? And then they say, oh, no, that's up to David. If I said what David said, the PM's office would get upset. And then sometimes we engage in a little bit of a discussion as to why are you here? We have a little bit of a discussion about Bert Kelly, who was a minister for 5 minutes, who changed the course of Australian politics. We have if I'm feeling particularly philosophical, I'll talk to them about one of my favourite politicians, Edmund Burke, who was in government for about 12 months of a 30 or 40 political year career. It's ideas that change things, it's courage that changes things, it's standing against the tide that changes things, changing things, and this is what I say to young Liberals, to young IPA members, to young people involved in politics. You can become a minister, you can aspire to become a minister, the chances are you probably won't, or you can aspire to change the world and make the world a better place. It is your choice. When I told a few people I was speaking at the LDP conference today, and I was honoured to do so, and I told a few of my Liberal friends, I said, John, why are you doing that? You're a Liberal Party member. And I said, well, I am a Liberal Party member. I've maintained my Liberal Party membership for 20 years, 25 years. But as I said on the Bolt report, middle of last year, when the Liberal Democrats come out in favour of repealing Section 18C, when the Australian Conservatives come out in favour of repealing 18C, when Pauline Hanson's One Nation Party comes out in favour of repealing 18C, and the Liberal Party doesn't, what are we to do? Which is why I think the role of the LDP is so important. We need more voices in the debate for liberalism in Australia, not less. One of the things that I've been thinking a lot about and I've been writing about is that Australia is a small country. The idea of liberalism, libertarianism has for too long been maintained in the political process. It has been maintained by the Liberal Party for good or for ill. That has stunted and retarded the debate about freedom in Australia, because freedom and politics don't often go together. And what I see now, and what excites me so much, is a broad discussion on the centre-right of Australian politics that is leading to many different voices, varying opinions, a liberal opinion, a conservative opinion, a libertarian position. This is very exciting and very encouraging indeed. It is good for politics, it is good for policy. Most importantly, it is good for ideas, and that, I think, is the future. Let me just say, make a few comments about what David actually asked me to speak about, which is economics and our economic condition. The challenge that we face is that, broadly put, economics is being run by the Canberra Party. And the Canberra Party is, at the moment, the coalition. It is the Labor Party, it is the senior echelons of the public service. It is mediated by the opinions of Fairfax, it is mediated by the opinions of universities, of the senior public service. And by and large, that has failed us. Nothing upsets me more, well, as you can tell already from the 15 minutes I've been talking, a lot of things upset me. But one of the things that concerns me is when politicians go up and say, we created 100,000 jobs, 150,000 jobs. No, no, no. Unless, of course, they're talking about the NDIS, which is our taxes creating those jobs. People create jobs, entrepreneurs create jobs, people take risks to create jobs. It is not the government, it is not the state. This is an entire mindset that I think we have to change. You can argue, and as Tom said, we've had 26, 27 years of uninterrupted economic growth. You can argue when the malaise set in. You can argue the malaise set in after 2007 with the election of the Rudd government. For me, with my background in political history, I think it goes back a little bit further. I think it goes back to the Chifley government and the beginning of the Menzies government. In the 40s, it goes back to the second uniform tax case, which gave the High Court power to overturn the Constitution and centralise more things in Canberra. Some of us, if I was a little bit more libertarian, would go back to the 1st of January 1901. I would argue the Constitution as currently conceived has not served freedom. It has not served the intention of the founders. It has not served competitive federalism. There's no such thing as states' rights. People have rights. The reason why you want a state government or a local government, if they have to regulate, to be more likely to regulate than the federal government is, that gives us more control, more accountability, and is more transparent. I think if we are going to overturn the precepts of the Constitution, then we should do a lot more than just tinker at the edges, but that is a debate for another day. As you know, this year the Commonwealth Government is going to confiscate $400 billion of our money. Commonwealth gross debt is $534 billion. I don't need to tell you, people in this room, that gross debt, net debt, is a tax on future generations. That is why I think there's been an upsurge of interest, of commitment from young people, not just because they're prevailing against the current orthodoxy of left liberalism, but they're understanding that the current generation has impoverished them. As KPMG pointed out, and I don't often quote consultants, but I will because in this case their argument serves my purpose, more than half of Australian taxpayers are net tax takers, i.e. they take more in welfare than they pay in tax. This is unsustainable for a democracy. And what do we get for it? We get a $90 billion NBN program that we know is already out of date. We get a $60 billion submarine program designed to save 2 federal seats in South Australia. We get a $55 billion program on schools, which will simply see standards decline further. We have huge challenges. Private investment right now in Australia is at the lowest levels since Gough Whitlam. Our economic competitiveness is declining. 10 years ago, in the World Economic Forum standards, again, I'll quote them because it serves my purposes, I was disappointed when Donald Trump did decide to go to Davos. I thought that's why people elected him not to go, but anyway. Australia was ranked 9th. Now we are ranked 21st. The rate of company formation, new companies being formed, is at its lowest level in 10 years. When bureaucrats turn their mind to these challenges of red tape, of regulation, they are confused. There was a Commonwealth Department of Industry report on entrepreneurship in Australia, and the authors identified that small businesses are being started at the smallest rate, as I said, of any time in the last 10 years. And the authors said this was puzzling. It was puzzling that less small businesses are being started now in Australia than ever before, because at the same time as this is occurring, government spending is increasing. They said it was puzzling. They could not understand how government was getting bigger while at the same time businesses were declining in number. Red tape is a fundamental challenge to our freedom, not just in terms of the costs that it imposes, but in terms of the way in which it implies a bureaucrat is better able to make a decision about our own businesses, about our own farms, about our own families, better than we are ourselves. Last year we passed 3,500 pages of legislation in the federal parliament, which doesn't even include subordinate legislation. The cost of red tape is conservatively estimated by the IPA to be $176 billion a year. That's 11% of GDP. Red tape is now Australia's largest industry, and it is so pleasing that Senator Leonhelm is now, for the first time in the Senate's history, leading a Senate inquiry into the costs of red tape. This is very important, and it wouldn't have happened without the Senator leading that charge. Red tape is administered by more than 1,100 government entities. 400 of them were established by the Rudd-Gillard governments. Since it was elected, the coalition has abolished no more than a couple of dozen. All of these are impositions on our freedom. We can talk about the 22,000 pages of the environmental impact statement that Adani has had to complete to start their coal mine. We can talk about the 4,000 permits that the Roy Hill iron ore mine in WA has had to endure. Or we can talk about the 847 hours that it takes for someone in New South Wales to train to be a hairdresser. We can talk about the 72 licences that it takes for someone to open a restaurant in New South Wales. So it's no surprise that 68% of businesses think they are over-regulated. These are huge challenges. How do we confront these challenges? As I said, I think it's at a number of levels. It's about having more voices, not less voices in the debate. It's about understanding the current and long-term challenges. Some of the current challenges, for example, involve something as basic and yet as dangerous as the Commonwealth's new proposed so-called electoral reforms, which would basically put within the purview of the government, i.e. the Australian Electoral Commission, what we say when we express a political opinion. I find it very interesting and amusing that Get Up and other left-wing organisations are now complaining and talking about government control over their actions. And I think those organisations do have a point. I think this legislation is very dangerous, and I can go into more detail about it later. I think it needs to be thrown out in its entirety. But I find it remarkable that the left, who support measures like the government regulating our media, the government regulating what we can say about race or ethnicity, now are opposed to the government regulating what we say about political opinion. I think we need more voices standing up for the rise of the national security state. I think it's no coincidence that at the same time we are finding out about let's put it politely, the massive scandal that is the role of national security agencies in the US, the FBI, the FISA court. At the same time as we are finding out about the national scandals of that, we are reading about one of the most serious security breaches in recent years, which is a couple of filing cabinets going missing. And sadly, if it hadn't gone to the ABC, we would have taken what happened seriously. But at the same time as we're doing that, we are giving the government even more power over what we say, do even more power over what the government can look at. I want to keep Australia safe, as we all do. But there's no point keeping us safe if we lose our freedoms. I'm terribly disappointed when I think a very good member of Parliament, someone like the Attorney General Christian Porter, says, talking about this national security legislation, it is not our intent, it is not the intent of the legislation to imprison journalists for doing their jobs. Well, I don't care what the intent is, I care what does the legislation do. When Section 18C was passed in 1995, I'm sure it wasn't the intent to put before government courts and tribunals people like Andrew Bolt and Bill Leak, but that's exactly what happened. I think if we are to reinvent liberalism, we have to go back to some principles. Some of the principles that I and the IPA are thinking about are democracy. We have to reinvent democracy, and by democracy I mean each one of us getting a say, regardless of whether we are employed or not, regardless of whether we spend 17 years at university or not, regardless of whether we live in the city or the bush. We all get a say. Democracy has to go further. Australia has simply traded off democracy and said, well, if you get a say and a vote and you lose the election, or your side loses, then the majority side can do what they want. I think we have to reconceive of democracy as allowing us, as far as possible, to live as much as we want to live ourselves, which engages, therefore, a degree of localism. We, as local, smaller political units, we can live in a high-tax state or a low-tax state. We can live in a local council area that has legalised marijuana or hasn't. We need to have a lot more choices. We have to reinvent democracy, we have to invent localism, and we have to reinvent egalitarianism. The idea that we are all equal. We are all equal politically, we all have equal political rights, that no one is better than us and we are better than no one else. And that's why I think what I think Brexit was about, what Trump is about, that is why Jordan Peterson has had 5 million views, that is why Milo has screaming crowds coming to watch him in Australia, and more power to him. We haven't heard any more of the Victorian police charging Milo's organisers $50,000 for the event. That is why young people are being enthused and encouraged. They want to stand up, they want to live a life of meaning and fulfilment and flourishing, and that's our job to accomplish. It won't be accomplished anytime soon. It won't be accomplished in time for the next federal election or the next state election, but it is a long-term battle that will last generations, and I'm pleased to be here this morning in the middle of that battle, and in the middle and with people who care as much about freedom as I do. Thank you.
Very well said, John. Thank you very much for that. We do have time for a couple of questions for John, so if anybody...
John, very inspiring, fantastic. You said you're a member of the Liberal Party for 25 years.
Don't hold that against me.
I don't, in fact I was much the same. But there's nothing to prevent you from being a member of this party and the Liberal Party. So,
yes, there is.
Oh, there is? There is, you see? That's illegal.
There's a large, scary, bearded man here. Yes, yeah, it's against the Constitution.
Oh, well then, all I can do is suggest you change your allegiance.
Thank you.
Which constitution? The party's?
The party's constitution.
Oh, okay,
yeah.
I wasn't sure whether you meant the state.
Yep.
Okay.
Anybody else have questions for John? We've got a couple up the back there and then some over here.
Okay, my name's Jackson, 19 years old. I was just wondering what your thoughts were on compulsory voting. So obviously America takes a different approach, and so as someone who believes very strongly in freedom, I don't see it as correct that the government would fine someone for not wanting to participate in democracy. I believe it's a choice. So what was your thoughts on compulsory voting?
Completely agree. It devalues democracy, it devalues the right to exercise choice, it devalues our voice. At a matter of principle and philosophy, practically all it does is enshrine the oligarchy of the major parties. This is a huge challenge. The major parties are supporting electoral reform, as I mentioned, which will only advantage them. I don't believe that political parties should be funded by my taxes. Public funding is a conspiracy against the public. And I think that voluntary voting would reinvigorate the public debate.
Still hiding over here in dark corners, but we have another question.
John, you didn't mention compulsory preference.
Hi, my name is Nelson. What are your thoughts on people who are now telling everyone to like boycott Hollywood because it's basically nothing but left-wing propaganda, and that communist China is now buying up Hollywood?
Oh, look, I've got to say, I take a relaxed view to Hollywood, to Facebook, to Twitter. These are all voluntary organisations. We don't have to watch any of them. We don't have to get on Facebook. We don't have to get on Instagram. Certainly, it leaned left. Certainly, all the evidence is the search results, for example, are biased. Certainly, the Golden Globes are terrible to watch, and the Academy Awards, there'll be even more preaching. We don't have to watch it. What we do is we create our own streams. We make our own choices. I think the internet and digital technology is wonderfully liberating. The IPA, last year we had more than 1 million people watch our material. 20 years ago when I started in politics, and then the IPA a bit after that, we'd have to negotiate with the sub-editors of the major newspapers. If it wasn't for digital technology, Jordan Peterson, as I said, wouldn't be saying the important things that he is. So I've got to say, personally, I'm very relaxed about that. The worst thing you could do would be to regulate it in some way. Just down here, Peter mentioned compulsory preferential voting too. I agree. I think compulsory preferential voting is just as bad as compulsory voting on ballot days.
Excellent. I think we've got time for 2 quick questions for John. So one here and then one up the back.
Thank you, John. Rawdon Hill. You alluded to competitive federalism on a few occasions. My understanding was that our Constitution actually supported competitive federalism. Now, I think this is a very important aspect, particularly coming from WA. Can you comment on that? To what extent does the Constitution need to be changed, or is it that politicians have veered from the original intent?
Thank you. The Constitution did envisage competitive federalism, but if the Constitution allowed federal politicians to appoint the High Court, then competitive federalism was never going to come into effect, or we had it for only 20 or 30 years. I don't think any federal politician, Labor or Liberal, assuming those two parties will stay majority powers for the next few years, will appoint solid federalists, people to the High Court who believe in the federation, who believe in local autonomy. I think there's a range of other alternatives such as constitutional amendment, discussion about Waxit. there has to be something beyond what we have now. The IPA has always argued that if we are to have income tax, and you can debate about whether we should have income tax, it has to be levied at the state level. I think federalism has for too long had everyone's eyes glaze over, but as I've said in the media, federal politicians' eyes won't glaze over if the coalition loses 5 seats in WA because of the inequitable GST distribution. I'd argue you should abolish the States Grants Commission. If we are to have a GST, it should go back to everyone per capita. All that the GST does now is prop up failed states like Tasmania and South Australia.
G'day, John. My name's Peter. Thanks for your talk today. I'd just like to ask you a question about something more local. Last week, Sydney trains had a lot of disruptions, and we're going to continue having those. Melbourne's had a privatised transport system for about 20 years now, where they've contracted out that to, I think, MTR from Hong Kong, and also trams. Do you think there's been a difference in the service? Do you think Sydney could benefit from that? Or what is your view on that in general?
Well, I worked for the Kennett government in the 90s when the transport system was privatised. It has worked well. The time when public transport in Victoria has not worked well is when the government has got its hands on it. I.e. the ticketing system, which is a disaster, i.e. security on public transport, which the government has botched. I, for the life of me, can't understand why any public transport is in any government hands whatsoever. And there's lots of evidence that would show public transport, such as it is better in Victoria than in New South Wales. But then again, I find New South Wales really strange at lots of levels. The lockout laws, council amalgamations. Again, Kennett government amalgamated something like 300 councils into 60 or 70, I think. That was an unmitigated disaster. There were efficiencies for a couple of years, and all that happened is after councils got bigger, they bloated. Chief executives paid themselves $1 million a year, and local power, local control was diminished. I would argue for more local councils. Australia can have more states, and you could even increase the size of the House of Representatives so you have more people who are closer to the politicians, to the public, who are not tied to party discipline in the way they are at the moment. So I think this goes to the discussion about localism, but to come to your point about public transport, I find it very confusing what's happening in New South Wales.
The trains on Peter Batchelor's line always run on time. Please thank John Roskam of the IPA for his